Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 83 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at PSCU. As the nation's premier payments CUSO, PSCU proudly supports the success of more than 1,500 credit unions. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Bryan Branch. Bryan is the president and CEO of Woku. Bryan and I have talked about him being on the show for quite some time. We planned on recording this episode on a Woku field engagement abroad, but well, you know, a global pandemic got in the way. So we connected through Zoom, like many of us have been over the past few months. This was a great conversation about credit unions and the leadership role we can all have to make change here and around the world. Bryan talked about the struggles that we will all feel from a global recession, but also the opportunity credit unions have by being here now for members during these difficult times and the loyalty that will lead to after we all get through this, which we all will. We also talked about why it is so important for U.S. credit unions to be a part of the global credit union community. Bryan shared the leadership lessons he's learned over his 30 years at Woku and in 10 years as the CEO of that organization. In the second part of the show, the myth about leadership he would like to debunk is one that I've said often and even said in this episode. So he may have changed my thinking a little bit with his answer. Let's see what you think about that. As always, we had some fun with the rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. This conversation was a ton of fun, even if it did make me miss the experiences that only come from international travel and being on the ground with people around the world. I look forward to the time that we're moving around this world again, and hopefully it's soon, and get out there and be a part of one of the field engagements with Bryan and the Woku crew. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Bryan Branch. Enjoy. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Randy. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, I've been looking forward to having you on. You and I have talked about this for a while, but I always assumed we would do it abroad someplace at one of the events. It's kind of interesting. Before this global pandemic hit that we were all experiencing, I felt like we were seeing each other quite a bit. End of last year, we were in Kenya for Georgia's Acosta Congress, and then saw you at a CUSO event in GAC, and then, as we were talking before we hit record, 4 months of nothing, right? Groundhog Day, only Zooms. So,
it's been just a tremendous irony in that, as you say, I'm used to getting on a plane and being in different parts of the world and connecting intensely while there, and haven't been able to do that. A little disorienting, to be honest with you. But very ironic that how the world has pulled even more closely together in this period of time, because when we do talk to each other across borders and across the world, the first questions are, is everybody well? How's your family doing? How are you guys coping? Great sense of connectedness, community.
Yeah.
And frankly, the time zones no longer matter. We're Zooming, we're connecting, we're doing virtual meetings at all hours of the day and the night. And everyone's just very thirsty to talk to each other.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've even heard people talk about a little bit of Zoom fatigue, right? Because,
right.
And it brings up an interesting thing. You work with folks all over the world, right? And that global community. With all of us being at home, sometimes it's tough to turn off the office a little bit. Like you said, you could be on a call 12 hours, with somebody in the Philippines. It's 12 hours, the middle of the night for you. So it's an interesting time that we live in for sure. One of the things I'd first like to start with is just this idea. I am a huge fan of Woku. I love what you guys do, and I love the stories. Any success stories that you'd like to share recently from the global community?
Well, I'd share a couple if you don't mind. One is about the difference that our global community makes, our credit union community makes at the community level for people who are at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of work over the last couple of years with refugees around the world. We have about 70 million refugees now, people displaced from their homes. And very often, communities turn to credit unions to have credit unions find solutions so that people don't have to leave their homes, or as people are coming into new areas, those areas turn to their credit unions to find ways to integrate the incoming refugees. And so we've started up a new program that we started developing towards the end of last year. And we've launched this year working in Peru and Ecuador with Peruvian Ecuador credit unions who are helping refugees that come from Venezuela, which is just imploding, coming apart. And these people come in and they have very limited resources and assets. And in a time of the COVID epidemic, they are the hardest hit. And so credit unions have stepped up, and we've gotten some support to work with these credit unions to help these people integrate into the Peruvian and the Ecuadorian economies, because in the long run, that provides more stable communities, and economically and politically. And then the other, success story that I would point out is in Poland. And, we have a long history in Poland. We worked with Lech Walesa back at the time of the fall of the Iron Curtain, building a credit union system there. And they really took to heart our Challenge 2025 about digitization of the global credit union system, because they saw in this time of pandemic, people want to feel safe. And when they're in crowded banking halls, or when they're doing face-to-face transactions and passing cash back and forth, then they feel less safe than doing digital transactions. And so they've really upped their game.
I'm glad you brought that up. I know last year when I heard you speak, it was a lot about that, the digitalization 2025 plan. And I'm like, that sure was timely, right? Like and we've seen a lot of credit unions have to push that forward, making those changes over the past few months. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's so interesting. There's something when you mentioned Peru and Ecuador, one of the things that I've even been noticing here, it's something that Jill and I were just recently talking about, was it's kind of funny who the essential workers are that we're now seeing, right? Like they tend to be like when you were talking about the people coming from, Venezuela and not having much on a global scale. We're also seeing that in the US as the people that either had to work, they weren't the ones who necessarily were the high earners. And then also the folks that have lost their jobs or, have been displaced during this. I think we've seen that across the globe. And it's to me, it seems like it's such an amazing opportunity for credit unions to be part of that solution, right?
Absolutely. And, frankly, you and I are very privileged in that we get to work at home.
Absolutely.
And my heart goes out to all those people who don't have that option, where they lose their work. And very often these are the people that are turning to credit unions to help them get through this crisis. And, we're on the line talking to credit union systems all over the world about this. We talk about the waves that come with this kind of crisis. There's the health crisis. Then there's the credit union financial impact crisis. And then there's the global recession wave.
Yeah.
And, what I keep telling all of our colleagues is we've seen these crises at a national level. We've seen them at a regional level over and over again. And what we always see is that because it's instinctive on the part of the credit unions to help their members get through these crises, that generates a tremendous sense of loyalty from the members. And the return will be, as we get through this recession, will be a tremendous membership growth and savings growth. And we expect to have a very large resurgence of credit union systems and tremendous growth around the world. The challenge, though, with that will be people are not going to go back to doing business the way that they used to do it. They're going to want those digital channels.
So that brings me the next two questions I had written down before, and I think I can put them together here and it goes right into that. Number one, I was going to ask you, how has it changed the way, like you mentioned earlier, you were on airplanes more than you were probably on the ground before. How has it changed the way that Woku is engaging with credit unions? And on the flip side, going back to that digital experience, how do you view the kind of that future of the way that members engage with the credit unions all over the world?
Well, so the first question is about the work that we do at the World Council. And, we're talking about this all the time. We can't get on a plane.
Yep.
And if we were to land in some country right now, they would quarantine us for 2 weeks if they would let us in.
Right, or send you home.
Yep. And yet everyone is very anxious for contact with the outside world and engagement. So we have to do so much virtually. And it started out with a tremendous bang back in March. And so everyone wanted to talk to each other. So it was just natural for us to provide those forums to engage credit union systems across regions to talk about the impact and how they were dealing with it, and to talk about their challenges with the regulators and how to deal with the regulators and the policymakers, how to protect the credit unions through this. And now we move more to how do we provide training, technical assistance virtually. Yep. So if our folks can't get on a plane and be there, how do we do that over the virtual communication means? And there's a great abilities in terms of technology today. And there's in systems that reach across borders. And so very effective ways to manage our ongoing programs. The challenge sometimes is about how do you provide technical assistance and training locally? So developing the content that you can deliver through these channels is an ongoing challenge. But, the great advantage we have is that we are a global system. And so we have, we have tremendous, well-qualified people in our offices and our programs overseas that are on the ground, and they can provide that support. We have member organizations in these countries. I talked about Peru and Ecuador. Yep. We have member organizations that are there, and they can carry out these programs even if we can't be there. And then we also have anchors. In each region, we have a strong progressive member where we have a strategic partner that they can help lead some of these charges, such as the digitization charge.
So it sounds like, the system you had in place has allowed you to just keep moving forward in this time when we kind of all need each other most, right? So
absolutely, yeah.
A question that I've asked other folks when they've been on the show who have worked more on the international development side, whether it was when George was on the show or Lois, or I had Bill Cheney on when we were in Kenya and stuff like that. The question is that I love to ask is, why do you feel it's so important for U.S. credit unions to be involved with WOCCU and have that global exposure? Like, if I've often heard from people that ask me, and I've talked to a lot of credit union folks who do it, where it's like, I'm thinking of so many different people who have said to me, what I bring back is way more than I give, right? Like, just like what I bring back to my credit union and my community. You run the organization that represents kind of the world of credit unions. Why is it important for U.S. folks to be involved?
Yeah, and that's a challenging question we get all the time. And I think there are several answers to that. At an abstract level, in the U.S. credit union system very often is seen as the leader around the world in the credit union system. And so other countries look to the U.S. credit unions to see what they're doing, how they're dealing with challenges. And I think that leadership role is an important one. And I think that we lead a community of shared values. And in this time of crisis, it just is so apparent to me. We have a health crisis that is caused because the world is so small now. The world is so connected. And it has an impact that reaches many other countries and ourselves. And what I find over and over again is that the communities in all these various countries go back and look to their credit unions for solutions, and the credit unions look to the U.S. for suggestions on how they respond to their community. So I think that leadership role is really important. And you mentioned, people come back enthused by what they bring back. And what I've heard from so many of our peers that have traveled overseas with us and work overseas with us is that when their staff go and participate in these programs overseas, and it's not always about travel. Sometimes it's about receiving visitors. Yep. They are so much more motivated and committed to the credit union, the individual credit union where they work, or the credit union system and the credit union ideals. So it's a wonderful professional development and staff retention strategy.
I agree completely. I cannot wait to be out there doing more. So the last question in this section, and I know this is a tough one, but if you were to break out the crystal ball, we're sitting down a year from now, what are you most proud that you and your colleagues at WOCCU have accomplished?
We're talking a year from now.
1 year from now. I know it's hard to even tell what's going to go on 2 months from now or 2 weeks. But
what I want to be and what I expect to be proud about is how we help credit unions get through the recession that's coming.
Yep.
The credit unions, you look at what credit unions have done. They have restructured their loans to help their members. That means reduced loan income. They have dealt with the regulatory restrictions of holidays on loan payments. That's going to impact their income. They've had members who have lost their jobs, haven't been able to pay their loans, so they're going to have delinquency. So it's going to be an impact on their balance sheet, their income. They've got a recession coming, economies have shut down, small businesses have failed, people have lost their jobs. That's going to have an impact on credit unions. And again, what I'm going to be really proud about a year from now is how credit unions not only got through that crisis, but they used that crisis to really excel and help survive, help not just survive, but help their communities be sustainable and grow.
I agree. I think there is such an opportunity because you mentioned it earlier, that loyalty that comes when somebody is there for you in your time of need. I think credit unions just have, like I said, an amazing opportunity here. To move on to the second part of the show, it's all about the leadership. First off, I've asked everybody who comes on the show, what inspired you to take the gig as president and CEO of Woku?
I've been with the World Council for 30 years, and I've seen the world turn over many times. And so I'm going in my 10th year now as CEO.
Yep.
And, I felt that there were some significant challenges out there that we had to step up to. And I wanted to take a leadership role in helping to respond to those challenges for the international credit union system and help pull the system together. And I've enjoyed that. It's a tremendous challenge. It's very consuming at times. And sometimes, we don't have the success we want, but then we have a big success and we're all in again.
That's good stuff. Since you became the CEO a decade ago, has the inspiration changed at all?
The inspiration, no, I would not say the inspiration has changed. The inspiration is about living our values and making a difference in people's lives. And, sometimes it's people at the bottom of the pyramid, it's poor people. Sometimes it's just good, working people on the street. But seeing the impact that credit unions make in people's lives through periods of crisis or challenge or opportunity is what keeps me inspired.
Is there something that your colleagues have heard you say so many times that they can finish your sentence?
Will make a difference. We can get very busy putting out fires. We can get focused on carrying out processes, and all of that's important. But, very often we can become very diffuse, doing too many things. And I always try to bring it back to, is this something that's going to make a difference? That's the bottom line.
I love that. I've thought about this a lot recently. People have had to make a lot of quick decisions. Things have changed very quickly. So as a leader, we often have to make those decisions. At the end, sometimes, you like to bring the whole team along, but the buck kind of stops with you, right? Like as the CEO, Sure. It's kind of that idea. Sometimes it's lonely at the top. You work with a lot of leaders from around the world, lead an organization yourself. Have you always had that ability to make the tough decision, the one that might not be popular short term, but for the greater good? Or is that something that you had to cultivate in yourself over time?
I think that was something I had to cultivate very early on. And, there's nothing as instructive as not making a decision and then seeing how it hurt other people.
Yeah.
So, if you're not going to make a decision because you don't want to make a call that hurts someone or it's uncomfortable, and then you see how it hurts a number of people who didn't deserve that, then that's a pretty quick lesson to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you said, it's lonely at the top. And, one of the questions you asked me earlier was, what's a common myth about being a leader that you want to debunk?
Yeah.
And that's the one. I don't think it is lonely at the top.
Okay. Yeah.
I think, there's a structure, there's a formality at the top, but I think one of the great opportunities about being at the top is pulling people together.
Yeah. It kind of brings me to another spot that I would like to ask. You have this, what I would assume is a pretty amazing network across the world. And, something that I've been thinking a lot about kind of ties into something you mentioned earlier was that connection that we're all kind of looking for at this point, whether it's, most of it's virtually at this, through the digital channels, but has mentoring played a big role? Whether did you have mentors that have helped you get to where you are, or, working with other folks, around the world to mentor them? That network that you also have, how has that, I guess, benefited your career?
I think I've had lots of great role models and examples, and of varying degrees of intensity. And just as I've had great models for what to do, I've also had lots of great models for what not to do.
Absolutely.
And I would thank a lot of people for that.
Yeah. If there's somebody that's out there, I guess, and I wanted to throw this out and I didn't send you this one over, but if people out there want to be more involved in the global credit union community, what's the first step they should take?
I'd suggest, get a hold of us, contact us. We're easy to find. Woku, WOCCU.org, or write to me myself, B Branch, B as in boy, branch as in a tree, at Woku.org. Especially in this day, it doesn't mean you have to get on a plane right away and travel somewhere. There's lots of virtual opportunities for engagement and lots of things that we can do around the world.
That is true. I wanted to make sure I got that in there. Back to some of the leadership questions, though. When you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made, or, again, you work with a lot of different leaders that you see young leaders make often?
I think, when I look at mistakes I've made, very often it's about not looking far enough ahead.
Okay.
Not thinking 2 or 3 steps down the road in terms of what kinds of risks are out there and what do we need to mitigate them, or what's going to be the further down the road impact or reaction to this. Along with that goes the notion that when you see a problem, you need to find a solution. How are you going to mitigate that? You can't not address that.
Absolutely. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received that you find yourself going back to often in your career? As
cliche as it sounds, for me, it's always the golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated.
So I was so interested to ask you this question. What is and this has changed so much in the past couple of months here, but what does the typical workday look like for you today? And what is the perfect Bryan Branch workday?
Okay, so the typical day today is not the typical day 4 months ago or last year. I mean, I get up in the morning, I have my coffee, little quiet time, relax. And then it's just a deep dive into virtual connections. I often refer to these as phone calls, but they're not phone calls anymore. It's web-based connections with video or without video. And it's about, this is what's happening in our country. What are you seeing other countries do? Well, let's connect you with this country. And we're looking at this kind of approach. What do you think? And, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And, you should talk to, this group over here who's already done it. And so I found that I had to discipline myself and actually get up and leave the desk and take a break and do something, get some fresh air.
Yeah.
And then I'm back at it again. So your other question was, what's
the perfect day? What's the perfect day? Your perfect work day?
Back out in the field.
Yeah.
Back out in the field, working with people and credit unions in their communities.
So there was a question that I was excited to ask you. And, when you were talking about, you've been at Woku now for 30 years, the CEO for 10. Is there a moment that you flash back to where you're just like, yeah, we crushed that? Like still to this day brings a smile to your face, like that big win?
Oh, interesting. So my early work in the World Council started in Latin America, and it was a time of civil war in Central America. And it was a time when the credit union model was a very traditional model, something like what we had in the United States, maybe, gosh, I'm dating myself. Well, even before me, I'd say probably 50, 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And just common sense suggested, well, let's move to a different model. And in Latin America, it was a huge success. And we saw credit unions move to a more market-based, savings-driven base, community outreach base. And there was tremendous growth on the part of the credit unions in Latin America. And it was a model that we could then take to other parts of the world. We took it to Africa. We took it to Europe. We took it to Asia. And it really revolutionized the international credit union model for a number of years. So now, the world's changed 2 or 3 times since then.
Right.
But it was a great foundation to start from.
Oh, that's fantastic. Before we move on to the last part of the show, if you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what passions do you have outside of credit unions? You mentioned having to step away from the desk from time to time. What do you do to recharge?
Outdoors, water sports, kayaking. I enjoy going to the lake, going swimming, hiking. And my wife and I do a lot of outdoor bicycling and walking in the woods.
Getting outside in the woods. I'm with you there. Last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be. So what was Bryan like in high school? And do you remember the first time you got into memorable trouble?
High school. When I think of high school, I think of basketball.
Okay.
Getting in trouble. Sometimes it was a little hard for me to follow the rules. I wanted to follow my own path. Got off the reservation. So sometimes, that got me into a little trouble. Of course, that set me off around the world. So there's a bright side to that. That when I was in high school, I went on an exchange program to Mexico, and I was just fascinated and intrigued with what I learned and experienced there, and gone through several passports since then.
I was going to say, so was that what sparked the travel? Was the exchange program, or had you traveled as a family before that? That was the beginning.
That was the beginning.
That's fantastic. My experience started later in life. I wish it started earlier, but hey, it's never too late. Most of us stumbled into careers in credit unions in one way or another. When you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Interesting question. I wanted to be a paleontologist.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, moved on from that.
Then you moved on from there. Do you have any daily routines that you just have to do, or your day just feels off?
Yeah. I mentioned, I'd like to start with a quiet cup of coffee, and I enjoy being outdoors, and so making sure that I take time to get some fresh air and be in some greenery.
Yep. I'm again with you there. I need to have my coffee in front of me right now. So the random question, what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Well, that sure dates us. Those LP albums.
Yep.
I'd say Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingers.
There you go. I think the Stones have been mentioned a few times on the show. So I'm a reader. Jill and I have stacks of books all over the house, quite honestly. Many of them were recommended by people on the show. Is there a book that you've either gifted others, or like that book that you just think, or a few books that you think everybody should read?
The book I've been going back to for 40 years is The Way of Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching. And yes, I have abused many of my friends by pressing a copy of that upon them.
That's beautiful. That will be added to the list, and I'm sure others will pick it up. So as you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question, what's become less important?
Older, more important. Certainly time with my family. So I spent a lot of time on the road traveling and missed a lot of time with my family earlier. And so this COVID-19 thing has been a great opportunity for, I wouldn't say reacquaintance, but having significant time together.
Yeah.
And you said, what's less important?
What's become less important over the years?
Less important is bureaucracy. Doing things that have less impact. Now, certainly, we've got to do the prudential things, and I'm a stickler for, let's make sure we have good policies and follow good policies and mitigate our risks. But let's really question the value of what we get out of what we put our time into.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had that conversation quite a bit recently, is you only have so much time and resource. So where are you going to get the biggest impact out of? So there's a question that I didn't send you. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Who is the first person that comes to mind? Gandhi, Martin Luther King.
Yep. That's good. Bryan, again, thanks so much for being on the show and taking the time today. I look forward to doing another one of these when we can meet up someplace else in the world instead of over Zoom. But the last question that I have for you is, do you have any final asks or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I go back to your question of, why should people in the U.S. care about credit unions internationally? And I think we should care more now than ever before. And the kinds of challenges that we have seen over the last 4 months, including social justice challenges, are not just U.S. challenges. They're not just challenges in our local communities. They're worldwide challenges. And we get a tremendous amount of communication traffic from people around the world saying, we're dealing with the same problem. And we'd like to connect with you folks in the U.S. who are dealing with this challenge and find ways to deal with this. And together, we can really have more impact than each of us working on this by ourselves.
That is a beautiful way to end the show. I couldn't agree with you more. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. If people, you mentioned the email earlier. Is that the best way for people to get a hold of you if they have additional questions? LinkedIn, the Twitter machine. What's your preferred preference?
Sure. And, I assume people only can remember so many things. So there are other people I can connect them with rather than giving lots of other people as contacts in this moment. And also go to our website, and there are lots of ways to connect with us there as well at
Absolutely.
WOCCU.org.
We will link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again, Bryan. Please stay healthy, my friend, and I hope you have an amazing day.
You too, Randy. And we'll connect sometime somewhere else around the world.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you, sir. Before we go, I want to give a huge thank you to all of you for listening. We could not do this without your support, and just how many of you listen so often to the episodes on this show. So thank you again. And once again, a big thank you to Bryan for taking time out of his busy schedule with all the Zooms he's doing all over the world at any hour of the day to take some time with us and share his experiences. I know we will all benefit from this. And a big thank you to our sponsors, PSCU. Our friends at PSCU have been longtime partners of ours and supporters of CUInsight, so please make sure to click on the links in the show notes, give them some love, see everything they have going on to help the credit union community. Also, remember, we're on all the podcast players out there. Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're on it. We would greatly appreciate if you subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, maybe even or 5-star rating, even a review on the old Apple podcast machine. It really does help us with the visibility of the show. If you don't think we're worth the 5 stars, just feel free to shoot me an email. Let me know how we can improve. And don't forget about the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. Need some stimulation for the old mind while we're still all social distancing? We've got you covered. Get your next book recommendation from the guests on our show. Thank you all again for listening. I hope you have an amazing day, and please stay healthy, friends.